Good afternoon and welcome to the webinar about the Consumer Confidence Index for Nebraska. The webinar is presented by the Bureau of Business Research, which is part of the College of Business Administration here at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. My name is Eric Thompson. I'm an Associate Professor of Economics and also Director of the Bureau of Business Research. Today we want to give you a little bit more information about the index, tell you how it's put together, give you the January results. This is the first time we're releasing the results of the Consumer Confidence Index, let you know a little bit more information about what we found here in January, and then also talk about some of the potential future uses of the indicator. So we'll also give you opportunities at the end of the presentation to ask questions. So you can see there's a window kind of in the bottom middle of your screen where you can ask a question as the presentation's going. I'll go ahead and answer those at the end. Alternatively, you can wait to the end and raise your hand in terms of the webinar, and we'll turn your microphone on and you can ask a question at that time as well. So however you'd like to ask, we encourage you to ask a question. We also have a chat window open in the lower right-hand part of your screen. So you can chat with some of the other participants in the webinar, as we go. Hopefully you'll chat about the webinar, but I suppose you could chat about just about any subject. And then lastly, we'll be asking some survey questions periodically during the webinar. We have 3 survey questions for the webinar participants, and we'll go ahead and get your responses and then talk about some of those results in the context of the webinar. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started and let you know a little bit more about our Consumer Confidence Index. Particular, we'll give you the process by which it's put together. It's developed based on responses of Nebraska households. We have a monthly survey we're doing now called the Survey of Nebraska Households, and answers to 4 questions on that survey are used to develop the Consumer Confidence Index. We'll also, as I mentioned, share with you a little bit more in-depth information about the January results for the Consumer Confidence Index Nebraska. The results were released in the paper this morning, but we're going to give you a little bit more information about some of the subcomponents of the indicator. Lastly, we'll talk about potential future uses for the Consumer Confidence Index. Now, as I mentioned, the index is calculated based on responses to the survey, to 4 questions in the Survey of Nebraska Households. We actually have a copy of the survey in the window in the upper center part of your screen, and you can take a look at that or access that part of the screen. We have a monthly random sample of 500 Nebraska households. We have questions regarding current and future household financial conditions and plans for making major household purchases. We also have a 5th question that's not used to calculate the Consumer Confidence Index, but provides some supplementary information about what's the most important financial issue that households say they face. We use the results each month to calculate the Consumer Confidence Index Nebraska, and then that'll be released the first Friday of each month. So we're starting this year, 2016, and releasing the January results on the first Friday of February, and that's how it'll go. With each first Friday, the results from the previous month will be available and released because we're gathering data throughout the month from the Survey of Nebraska Households. We take a random sample of 500 Nebraska households. We obtain data on the universe of Nebraska households from the Survey Genie database that has detailed information about households all over Nebraska, whether those are single-family homes, rental units in single-family homes, or apartments in apartment buildings. So we draw randomly from that universe of Nebraska households and get a sample of 500 households that receive the survey. We send the survey at the beginning of each month. Actually, we'll send a postcard before the beginning of each month notifying people that a survey will be coming. They receive that survey right at the beginning of the month. Many households at that point will fill out the survey and return it to us. If that takes place, then they're done with the process. For people who don't respond to the first wave of the survey, then in the middle of the month, we'll send out and they'll receive a second survey, which will give them another opportunity to complete the survey. Because of this approach, we get about 2/3 of our responses during the first half of the month and about 1/3 during the second half of each month. Here you can see in the main PowerPoint window, the large window, the first 5 questions on the survey. You can see the first 4 are where we ask some of those detailed questions of households about their current financial situation, what their expectations are about their financial situation over the next 6 months. We also ask them whether now is a good time to make a major household purchase or whether they think it'll be a good time 6 months in the future. You can also see that open-ended question number 5, what is the most important financial issue facing your household? Get a lot of interesting answers from that, which we categorize into 12 main categories, and that's what we'll report. You'll see a little bit more detail about that later on. We also asked 4 questions of a demographic nature. So we asked whether the respondent is male or female, what is their date of birth, obviously to determine age, what is the number of residents in your household, is it a large or small household, and then also we have some income ranges that we ask people to fill out. Don't ask them their specific income, but try to get income within these ranges. We find that with this approach of providing ranges for people, we do get pretty good response rates in terms of income. Nearly all people will answer that question as well. Let's talk in a little bit more detail then about these questions. 2 questions ask about current conditions. So you can see here we ask people how they're getting along financially these days. In particular, do they think they're better off, worse off, or about the same as they were 6 months ago? And we're really especially interested in the share of people who say they're better off and worse off. Those shares are what we use to calculate the Consumer Confidence Index for Nebraska. We also ask a question, do you think now is a good or bad time to make a major household purchase? So the idea here is there's a number of household purchases of goods and services, food, medicine, so forth, that households need to make every month. There's sort of a steady purchasing, whether the economy is good or bad, whether household income is up or down. These types of necessity purchases tend to stay fairly steady. Where we see a lot of variance among households and their purchase patterns is in more non-necessity items, major household purchases. Those tend to fluctuate depending on how good consumers are feeling about the present situation in the future. So we focus on whether now is a good or bad time or neutral to make a major purchase such as a vehicle, appliance, furniture, or electronics. We also ask similar questions about the future. So looking ahead, do you think 6 months from now your household will be better off or worse off financially than you are now? Similarly, whatever you said about whether now is a good time to make a major household purchase, we ask how do you think you'll feel over the next 6 months in the near future. So those are the questions we use. Now let me show you specifically how we make our estimate of the Consumer Confidence Index Nebraska. Let me also say that the first poll is open, and we ask the question, do you think households will be more confident about current conditions or future conditions? And we'll show you in a minute what the results of the January survey said about that topic. Okay, so what is the specific methodology we use to translate the responses to these 4 survey questions into our estimate of the Consumer Confidence Index for Nebraska? Well, what we do is we focus on, as I said earlier, the share of favorable and unfavorable replies. For example, to that first question we talked about. What share of respondents said that they feel better off about their current financial situation than they did recently? What percentage of respondents feel like they're worse off? That would be an example of an unfavorable reply. So what we would do is we take the percentage who give a favorable reply, better off in the example I'm using, and we subtract from that the percentage of people who give an unfavorable reply, worse off in the example I'm giving, and then we add that to 100. So for example, if 20% of respondents give a favorable reply and 15% of respondents give an unfavorable reply, we would add 100 plus 20 minus 15 and get a value of 105 for that specific question. We make a similar calculation for the other three questions and get four numbers and then simply sum them together and divide them by 4. In other words, average them. So if we got an index value of 105 for the first question, 100, 95, and 90 for the third questions, then we'd add those together, divide by 4, and get a value between about 97.5, 98. So that's how we would make that calculation. So it flows directly from those household responses on the survey of Nebraska households. Okay, so how do you interpret then when you see that aggregate number, the Consumer Confidence Index Nebraska aggregate calculation, and you see that each month, how should you interpret it? Well, if you see a value of 100, you should interpret that as consumers are neutral. That would indicate that there were an equal number of favorable and unfavorable replies to those 4 questions. If you see a value above 100, you would conclude that consumer confidence is strong. More people had favorable replies about their family's financial situation, about whether it's a good time to make a purchase, than have an unfavorable reply. If you see a value less than 100, that indicates consumer confidence is weak. Now also remember there is a 5th question that I showed you earlier. Tell us what is the most important financial issue facing your household today. That's an open-ended question. People put whatever they want to put there. And what we found is there's sort of regular patterns in their answers, and we were able to classify those open-ended questions into 12 categories, one of which is other, but into 11 concrete categories plus other. And we're going to be able to report that out each month as well. And we'll look at some of the results from January in a moment. Okay, so what did we find in January in terms of the value of the Consumer Confidence Index for Nebraska? Well, if you didn't see it this morning in the news, we actually had a value significantly below 100. So the Consumer Confidence Index Nebraska value for January 2016 was 84.7. So well below 100, suggesting that consumer confidence in Nebraska is weak. Now, why might that be? Why is it so low? I think this could be reflecting the problems we've had in the country, including in Nebraska, in terms of the growth of household income. Since the year 2000, over the last 15 years, for middle-income households, lower-middle-income households, real wages, real household income has been stagnant or even falling in most years. So with households' real spending power, real standard of living declining, it's not surprising that they're feeling somewhat weak in terms of their confidence as consumers. And it'll probably take sustained improvement in incomes for this consumer confidence in value to track all the way back up to 100. Hopefully that'll be happening in Nebraska and around the country, of course, in the next few years. So in addition to the level, obviously it's interesting to look at how is the indicator changing from month to month. If we're below 100, are we at least improving most months or every month? Well, you can see we actually did not improve. We went backwards between December 2015 and our results for January 2016. Now, a little bit of background. We did do 3 practice surveys for the indicator in June, September, and December of last year. Make sure the survey was working properly. So we actually do have December 2015 results, even though we didn't release those to the public till today. And you can see that allows us then to see that consumer confidence did actually decline a little bit between last month and January, between December and January. Now, why did that happen? I think there's partly a kind of a seasonal effect going on there. So, during the holiday season, it's natural for people's mood to improve, at least on average, and perhaps a little bit more optimistic, a little more confident. However, in January, those credit card bills come in the mail, and people started thinking about paying back what what they bought back around the holidays, and perhaps that could be sort of a little bit of a negative effect on consumer confidence. So I think partly that drop can be explained by that. Another factor, of course, is the stock market was down sharply in January. For some respondents, that may have reduced their confidence. In fact, we saw that in some of the open-ended responses that people gave. They were quite concerned about stock market valuations. So I think that's part of the reason for the drop. Okay, well, let's look at the response to the survey. So do you think households will be more confident about current economic conditions or future economic conditions? We had about 3/4 of you say future economic conditions, so people will be hopeful that things are improving, and about a little above 1/4 said things will be about the same. So let's go ahead and see what the responses said. Recall that we had 4 questions. One asking about current financial conditions of the household, one asking about whether right now was a good time to make a major household purchase. Then we had the same set of 2 questions asking about the near future. And as you can see, in the case of general financial conditions for the household, confidence was a little stronger for the current year, for the current month, January 2016, than it was for the future. However, on the question of the timing of making a major household purchase, the future confidence was higher than the current confidence. So it was actually kind of a mixed bag. You can't really conclude that consumer confidence about the future is stronger than confidence about the present. So those of you who answered no change were a little bit closer to what we found, at least in January. I should mention we've now posted the second question. We'll get to the answer a little bit later. Do you think consumer confidence will differ by age and gender? So as we continue through the webinar, please answer that question, and we'll review your responses a little bit later. Okay, I also wanted to briefly tell you our results for January 2016 regarding that open-ended question. What's the most important financial issue facing your family? You can see we got a variety of responses. There's obviously a whole bunch of financial issues we all face, and you can see that there were some Nebraskans that had pretty much all of them at the top of their list. But some interesting patterns emerge here. First of all, in terms of the individual categories we had, the most common response, 16%, that's almost 1 in 6 Nebraska households, indicated that savings was the most important issue they faced. So saving for the future, whether it's retirement, college, buying a house, that was on the minds of about 1 in 6 Nebraska households as the top issue. And you can see cost of living, healthcare costs, I suppose, versus general cost of living. Were up there, what the income was, concerns about the future of your job or your business, how those would do in the future, taxes. These were all issues that people answered. So if I was to summarize the responses, I'd say about half of them, 43%, nearly half, were cost of living related issues. So, paying your taxes. Heard a lot of comments about property taxes. Healthcare costs, other major expenses that people were experiencing or worried they might experience, and then a general increase in the cost of living, whether that's utility costs, the cost of food, and so forth. We didn't get too much complaining about the price of gas since that's been headed down recently. But 1/4 respondents had more savings-related issues. I suppose paying off debt is a type of savings as well. And if you add those 2 responses together, that made up 1/4 of the household. So the top issue was savings or paying off debt. So a lot of Nebraskans are thinking about that issue. There's a lot of commentary all the time about people need to save more, they need to work on their debt. At least in Nebraska, a significant share of people seem like they're concentrating on that issue. And lastly, about 1/5 of respondents had income-related issues. So they might have noted that their income was insufficient, or they might have indicated that, hey, I'm concerned about my job. Will I be able to keep my job? My company's struggling. Others might have been business owners and were worried about how their own business would do. So it was interesting in my mind that most of the worries were about things like savings and the cost of living rather than concerns about the job market. we'll have to track that over the future to see how things change. Okay, well, let's go to the last part of the webinar and ask some questions about, how else can we use the Consumer Confidence Index and the survey of Nebraska households in the future. So, as I already mentioned, each month we are going to put out a revised our new estimate of the Consumer Confidence Index Nebraska. Be able to see where Nebraska consumers are, how their confidence compares to the previous months. So that's definitely one use. But are there other uses? Well, I think it's certainly possible to utilize the Consumer Confidence Index for Nebraska and some of the other research that the Bureau of Business Research does. So each month we also produce a leading economic indicator for Nebraska. And we also, at the same time, produce a coincident economic indicator for Nebraska, although we don't talk about that quite as much. In any case, those two questions about future conditions of consumers could be ultimately become one of the components of the leading economic indicator in Nebraska. Similarly, the questions about current consumer conditions could be part of our coincident economic indicator in Nebraska. So we're not ready to do that yet. We need to look at a year's worth of survey data and evaluate whether the responses in terms of consumer confidence should be added to our leading economic indicator report, but we may be adding it in about a year, and we feel like that could really improve our leading economic indicator report even further. Okay, let's go ahead and look at the responses to the second webinar participant survey question. So you can see that a lot of respondents, nearly 9 in 10 indicated, or nearly more than 8 in 10 indicated that they felt that consumer confidence would vary by age, but not necessarily by gender. And with the rest being gender or neither. We don't have any specific results for that yet. It's too early to conclude based on 1 month of results. But I think it's certainly true that these issues could be a factor. We have done some preliminary research on the effect of age and have found that there are some differences between retirement age individuals. Not everyone over 65 and over is retired, obviously, but among people in that age group, there did tend to be a little bit more pessimism about household financial situation in the surveys we've done. And interestingly enough, a little bit more optimism about whether it's a good time to make a major household purchase. So we do have the 3 test surveys we did in 2015. We've got the January survey that we did. There's some early indications that results may vary by age. We haven't found anything yet in terms of variance by gender, but it's too early to tell. We'll need to have 3 months, 6 months of continuous surveying before we can really make any conclusion about whether results vary according to any of the demographic data we're collecting, whether that's the age of respondents, their gender, their household income. I didn't list it here, but we could even do similar analysis according to how large the families are, the number of residents. So I think one potential use would be to focus on how consumer confidence varies in these different demographic groups, or even potentially by different regions of the state. A second potential use would be a similar type of analysis regarding that open-ended question, where we ask people, what's the most important financial issue facing your household? And that could indeed vary significantly by age of respondent. Perhaps older workers more concerned about medical costs, younger workers more concerned about savings. People in their mid-50s, I think, especially likely to be concerned about savings for retirement. So there could be some interesting differences, as there might be by gender and household income. So another future use would be use, again, several months of survey data to look at how patterns in consumer confidence and consumer attitudes vary by the demographic characteristics of households. I should mention that our third and final survey question is now up. Given that Super Sunday is coming up, what is your expectation? Who's going to win the Super Bowl? So be interested to see the the response is to that question. Other future uses. I think one possibility is that we could add additional questions on a month, at least in select months, to the survey of Nebraska households. So you've seen the survey form. It's literally one side and one sheet of paper. We're currently only planning to ask 9 questions. And because of that short survey, I think also because it's from the University of Nebraska, we tend to get pretty good response rates, between 25 and 40%. And frankly, when we were surveying not around the holidays, we were surveying back in June and September, we were up around a 40% response rate. So the survey has strong response rates. I think as long as we keep it close to its current length, we can continue to, but there might be room to add a few more questions if researchers would like to ask a question of 500 Nebraska households, or perhaps 3,000 Nebraska households over a 6-month period. There's potential to add additional questions. So we hope the survey, in addition to being useful for research about consumer attitudes, may be generally useful to researchers interested in the opinions and data about Nebraska households. As I mentioned earlier, we'll be releasing the survey the first Friday of each month. So obviously today, February 5th, was the first release date. Subsequent release dates will be March 4th, April 1st, May 6th, June 3rd, and so on. But these are the release dates over the first half of 2016. And we'll continue to release the results of the survey of Nebraska business on the first Friday as well. So we come out with a single report summarizing the findings about consumer confidence in Nebraska based on the survey of Nebraska households, but also some information about what businesses are expecting in the future based on the survey of Nebraska businesses. So please look for that the first Friday of each month. And now I'll open it up to questions, although before I do that, let's look at the results of our poll. So forget what you're hearing on TV. The favorite in the upcoming Super Bowl seems to be the Denver Broncos by a 4 out of 5 weight. So looks like Peyton Manning will be riding off into the sunset like John Elway with a big victory. So I think we'd all be happy for him. I feel compelled to note this is a little different than what I'm hearing from the analysts on TV. Perhaps this is a bit of a regional result. A lot of Broncos fans in the Nebraska area, as we all know, but perhaps it'll be true. So let me go ahead and start to get some of the questions that were asked, and let's start with the first one. The first one, what was the split between Lincoln and Omaha and the rest of the state? Do you plan to increase the sample so you can break out the geographic categories? So I think I mentioned that, although it wasn't formally in the webinar, but I think our strategy more likely would be to use data from multiple months and average it together in order to generate a large enough set of returned surveys in order to break out results between different regions of the state. So I apologize, I'm not yet able to answer a question like how does consumer confidence differ between different parts of the state. For example, right now, given that farm incomes have fallen recently, I'm very curious whether consumer confidence varies between the metropolitan and non-metropolitan parts of the state. And so we do hope to, as time goes by, start to release that information as well. Second question, the impact of a continuing strong dollar. So that's certainly showing up in our leading indicator. It's been a big drag on our leading indicator really for the last year. That's one of the components of the leading indicator where a rising dollar would be a negative for Nebraska's economy, obviously because of our agricultural exports, because of our manufacturing exports. And I think it does show up in some of the responses to the survey of Nebraska business. You do tend to see less optimism from ag and manufacturing in that survey. It could show up in our consumer confidence survey as well. Again, I think I indicated about 20% of respondents said that the most important financial issue they faced was either their monthly earnings or concerns about their job or concerns about how their business would be doing. And I think when something like the strong dollar is affecting some Nebraska businesses, you might see a spike in households giving an answer like that. So even in the survey of Nebraska households and the Consumer Confidence Index, the strong dollar is probably having some effect. A third question, can you talk a little bit more about the sample frame? How is it generated by Survey Genie? And what information is available on the frame about the household and individuals? Well, I think they're attempting to gather a comprehensive survey frame of all households. They do include a large set of I guess I'd call them rental properties, or people who live in commercial buildings where they have a significant number of units within each address. So it's a very broad sampling time frame. The Survey Genie is affiliated with a company that does consumer research, that makes businesses available to consumer researchers, and also they're very active in providing business lists as well. So they have every incentive to be as comprehensive as they can be. Of course, there's competing lists out there as well, and obviously variation in opinion about the strengths of these lists. We'll have to leave it there. We certainly appreciate you participating in our webinar. Please feel free to follow up with me should you have any questions. And if you'd like to receive these monthly reports on the Consumer Confidence Index Nebraska, leading economic indicator, and other Bureau research results, please go to bbr.unl.edu. And you can also go to our website, www.bbr.unl.edu. And if you need to contact any of us by email, the email addresses are there. So thank you for taking the time with us this afternoon. We look forward to seeing you in future webinars. In fact, our next webinar is planned for April 8th. Topic not yet decided, but we hope to have some additional results about our research on the Nebraska economy. Please, everyone, have a great weekend. Thank you.